I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. Now, I'm glad that we have the desire to understand the world. That results in all sorts of great stuff. We want to know everything. We're humans. We're curious. And maybe it's our culture. Maybe it's just humanity. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. Suddenly, I know that I don't know. But somehow everyone else seems to know. They all know differently from each other, but they all seem to know. What I'm saying is nobody's opinions are correct in the world. And yet it's impossible not to tie your opinions to your concept of self. And often people tie those things so closely together that they begin defending their guesses as if they're defending their very lives. In a way, they are. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 185 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Bob Pondillo and I interview Derreck Bennett. Derreck is the author of a book entitled Addictus. Derrick is an atheist who went through the 12-step program and wrestled with the higher power aspect of it. Derrick agrees with step 1 of the 12 steps that he is powerless over alcohol. But most AA groups take that powerlessness to a degree in which Derrick found counterproductive. As an atheist fascinated by religion and philosophy, Derrick has studied extensively to glean a comprehensive understanding of the history and philosophy and origins of religion. He was raised believing John 3:16 literally, that believers were immortal. In every sense of the word, even their bodies would not die. Imagine the cognitive dissonance when his father and mother both died. It's no wonder he tried to anesthetize his pain through alcohol. His story is both tragic and inspiring, as he models how to overcome alcoholism and nihilism and create a life for himself after hopelessness. Before we get into our talk with Derrick, raw nihilism is the belief that everything is meaningless. In its extreme version, it argues that all values are baseless and that nothing can be known or communicated. And that level of nihilism could produce a depressing hopelessness and despair. But a light version of it could actually produce hope and happiness. Like the old bumper sticker, "Life's a bitch, then you die." I think this is a truth that can set us free. As argued in his book, The Denial of Death, Ernest Becker says that most humans work very hard to suppress the awareness of their own impending death. But I've found that when I do the opposite, keep it at the fore of my awareness, then I actually value more the people and circumstances of my otherwise banal life. After all, if I'm alive to experience them, it means I didn't die that day. And that's a tremendous realization. If it's simply good to be alive, then even the worst day is at least a day, something I'm experiencing, and any judgment I place on it feels like entitlement. I don't do this, but what if we started each day saying to ourselves, "I could die today," instead of hiding that fact from ourselves? The "life's a bitch" part is similar. I think it's worth saying out loud and to ourselves every day, life is hard. Not in a self-pitiful way, but just as a check-in to make sure we've not slow and steady buried our heads in the sand. There's not one human on this planet that doesn't take a beating from this existence on a regular basis. It's going to get you and has gotten you your entire life. Nothing can stop it from hurting us and fucking with us. As a species, we work hard to mitigate our pain and suffering, But no amount of money, medicine, religion, science, self-help, exercise, entertainment, culture, travel, drugs, alcohol, sex, technology, nor fancy foods can prevent it from kicking our asses on a regular basis. All races, religions, nationalities, ethnicities, genders, rich or poor, all of us feel the pain of being human. Life is hard. No one comes through unscathed. I'm not saying get over it. I'm not saying buck it up. I'm not even saying stop whining. I'm just saying two universal truths. Life is hard, and it could end today. Life's a bitch, and then you die. Yeah, the hardness of life and our unavoidable impending death are unambiguous and self-evident. Usually such things should go without saying. But given how hard we try to drown out the constant dull hum of these truths, we would do well instead to pump up the volume and let honesty breed its best offspring, a jovial, carefree acceptance of this amazing consciousness we're all experiencing. I posted this meme this week on Facebook that said, "Actions prove who someone is, words just prove who they want to be," unquote. I like devices like this that cut through ambiguity, that shine like a flashlight on that which is otherwise murky. I like how this particular axiom looks to the evidence to know something. It's an example of living by sight, not by faith. But I wonder if people aren't a little too complicated for bumper sticker-sized slogans to fully capture the nuance of being human. For example, if my mother saw me flipping off my best friend or heard me cuss, she might use that line of thinking, that actions identify a person, to judge me as having poor character. And she would be wrong. In this case, I would rather she fulfill 2 Corinthians 5:7, the passage that says, "Live by faith, not by sight," and actually use her faith in my character to overrule what only sight might determine. When I posted that meme, an old friend of mine from back in Oklahoma commented. He's a Christian. In fact, I once looked up to him as a spiritual director in my life. I've had many good mentors in my life. His name is Mike Shaw, if any of you have seen him chime in with his Christian rhetoric. He's really a great guy, just totally and irreversibly brainwashed in the Jesus stuff. But when he read this meme, that actions prove who someone is, words just prove who they want to be, he wrote, quote, "Not necessarily. If their words are truth, then actions will eventually follow. The heart must have a truth infusion before their tree can bear apples," unquote. Which actually affirms the action, not contradicts it. But anyway, I'm reminded of the saying, "What you think about expands." Or another version of that comes from The Secret. What you think about, you bring about. And although I don't believe there's anything supernatural or magical about that, or that we have the ability to think something into existence, I am convinced that how we frame things is very powerful and can tremendously influence our attitudes and moods, emotions, and ultimately our lives. A few other mystical scriptures come to mind. Quote, "Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." People used to use that to point out my wicked heart because of my foul mouth, which, by the way, we cuss a lot on this show, I guess. And I just want to say that the vowels and consonants that we choose to form sounds that symbolize meaning are in and of themselves amoral. What makes a sentence immoral is the content and the intent, not the form or the packaging by which it is delivered. Anyway, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks has always meant to me that when a person talks, they're revealing what's in their heart, which is another way that the meme I posted is inadequate in capturing human complexity. The meme says actions prove who someone is, words just prove who they want to be, whereas if this scripture is true, then we can also know who someone is by their words, as well as their actions, especially if they grumble and complain a lot, or talk about their own achievements a lot. In that case, we might assess that they lacked praise and affirmation as a child and now are compensating for that deficit as an adult. Another scripture that may contribute to this conversation is Romans 4:17, which refers to God as one who calls forth that which is not as though it were, or calls things into being from nothing. Now, as I mentioned, I don't believe in magical powers or even that things happen for a reason. As a matter of fact, if something happens that you've been thinking about, I believe it's pure coincidence, 100%. However, if you've actually been doing something that would increase the potential for something to happen, then if and when it does, you can know that your actions and your words that sprang from your heart brought about something that would not have happened had you not gotten off your ass, trusted your own heart and desire, spoke to yourself and others about how you could help bring that about. These are that which changed the world, altered history, and opened up opportunities in your life. Also, the framing of your reality plays a big role in influencing your emotional health. When it comes to that which you cannot change, placing yourself in a posture of acceptance allows one to adjust and accommodate even one's mistakes as something one learned from rather than something to be ashamed of. One of my favorite Maya Angelou quotes is this: "Forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know before you learned it." Unquote. Today's guest, Derreck Bennett, is an alcoholic, and he talks openly about his alcoholism and his experience with the 12-step program. The 12-step program uses the Serenity Prayer, which is a good thing, and Derreck reinterprets it from a secular perspective, and it goes like this: "May I grant myself the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference." And normally people stop there, but it goes on. "Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking this flawed world as it is, not as I would have it, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with myself." We taped this conversation with Derreck Bennett on January 6th, 2017.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.
Also, you can support us monetarily in two easy ways. We've changed our Patreon support from a per-episode basis to a monthly pledge. So if you have been pledging $1 per episode in the past, please change your pledge to $4 or $5 to match your previous giving. That's at patreon.com/EA podcast, or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode is music by Hans Zimmer from the movie Interstellar. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. Hey, Derreck.
Hey, Derreck.
Hello.
Hello. Nice to hear from you. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
Yeah, good. This is Bob, the Bob part of Bob.
Okay, Bob.
Yeah, well, nice to meet you.
So our guest is Derreck Bennett, author of Addictus. And what do you call this, a book, Derreck, or is it a tract or a pamphlet? It's just 27 pages, right?
Yeah, it is indeed a book. It's a short one. I actually... My intention originally was to write just a short ebook, and I knew that I had enough material to qualify as an ebook, but then I had multiple friends saying they wanted paperbacks. So I went ahead and made a paperback version as well, and it's comprehensive enough to where it most certainly shares the crux of my story.
Yeah. So, these publishers that say, no, you need to pad it up with more pages. You know this, Bob?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I never have that problem. They always tell me.
And trim it back.
Shorten it. Yeah. So, yeah.
But what's the thinking there behind the publisher when they ask you to go to 1,000 pages or 800 or something?
Usually they tell you 230, 240.
Pages?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that. Because that's a standard kind of, I don't know why. I'm sure it has something to do with money.
Well, the shopper doesn't feel like he's getting his bang for the buck if it's...
Maybe.
Yeah, I sold it for as cheap as I possibly could, with the understanding that it is relatively brief. But among those who've read it, they seem to have really enjoyed it. It's gotten great reviews on Amazon, and the message that I'm trying to put out there is most certainly there.
Yeah. Well, what is the message you're trying to put out there?
First and foremost, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober for well over 3 years now, but it was a major, major struggle.
Yeah. I read the book last night, and there were several relapses where, you'd go for a couple of months and then go back. We'll get to the place where you attempted suicide, and that was crazy to read. I thought, when you were describing it, I thought, no, and then you did it, and I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah, wow.
But I was struck by the fact that you didn't even drink until you were a senior in college.
Right, yeah. I was pretty well focused on academics, all through college. I was dating a girl who was also very much focused on that, so she was a good influence. We were not engaged in the party scene at all, and then we broke up the summer prior to my senior year at Ball State. So it was after that I began to hit the party scene, and from the get-go, when I drank to get drunk. And if you think about this in terms of, I was conditioned, to drink like an idiot, because that was where I started, was in college, in the party scene. The whole idea was to drink to get drunk and be nuts. And so that's how I did it. That's the only way I knew how to do it. And for the next several years, any time that I would be out on the town, I always drank to get drunk, and I was belligerent. I had hangovers all through my 20s.
Yeah. I understand you got in some bar fights.
I did. I actually did.
Wow.
In my high school years, I took martial arts. Martial arts is something that you really are only supposed to use for the sake of self-defense.
Yeah.
In my drunkenness, at times, I found myself employing it if someone slighted me in the least. At the time, I thought it was cool. I thought it was funny. Looking back, now that I'm 40 years old, I realize it was childish and stupid and very regrettable.
So do you have any alcoholism in your family?
That's the strange part, is that I know I do not, to my knowledge. There is no background
Well, it's got to start somewhere.
Issues in my family. Yeah. Now, of course, my younger half-brother Anthony did succumb to opiate addiction, and I lost him the summer before last to that. You know, an addiction is a biopsychosocial phenomenon. So you can't, if you were to ask, is it nature or nurture? Obviously, that's a false dichotomy.
Yeah.
It's both.
Right.
And the nurture aspect of it, I think, was probably well enough to send both me and my younger brother into the throes of addiction. Although I would say there probably is a biological predisposition as well with our anxiety. So, I suffer from the anxiety and depression. I'm clinically diagnosed with OCD. A lot of people say, I'm so OCD. No, bullshit. No, you don't understand OCD. It's a real thing, and those who had it and are clinically diagnosed as such scoff at those who just think that they are.
So you were at Ball State, you said. You were studying, and it was you were serious about being a student there. When you lost your girlfriend, when your girlfriend and you broke up, that was the trigger then, right?
Absolutely. In very many respects, I would say so. I was heartbroken over that situation.
Right.
And so I was drinking for emotional reasons, too, and that definitely played a role in it. There's no denying that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you have a religious upbringing?
I had a very interesting religious upbringing.
Tell us.
I was raised as a Universalist Christian. Now, that's not to be confused with Unitarian Universalism, not that, but ultimately Christ will have saved every last living soul.
Nobody's in hell.
Yeah, people may go.
Okay.
Yeah, people may go to hell temporarily, but not permanently, because if God is the Father and He loves us as His children, then of course He would not want to punish us for all eternity.
Is that a denomination, or is that just somebody's concoction?
There actually, in later years, I would come to find through my research that there is such a thing as Christian Universalism. It is out there. Mm-hmm. Now, my family took it a step further and believed that if you were to believe in Christ fully in this way, then you also had what they refer to as physical salvation, which meant we could never die. They took that verse from the Gospel of John, he who believeth in me shall not perish but have everlasting life. They took that quite literally, and we believed we would never die. I had a unique sense of immortality as a child.
So your physical body would never die?
Would never die. We believed we were immortal. And of course, all of that changed when my father, when he was diagnosed with a brain tumor and lymphoma, he was never sure how to feel about the whole physical salvation thing. That basically was rooted in what my mom's side of the family, her parents, my grandparents believed. But on his deathbed, he came to accept it. And
that'd be the time
lo and behold, right, and lo and behold, he did die. So that, for me, at around 12 years old, was sort of the catalyst for realizing that perhaps not everything I was taught as a child was true.
Was it a catalyst for your family as well? Like, did they double down?
You know, I think that my grandparents, my mother, and her sisters had to start engaging in cognitive dissonance reduction right away.
Wow.
I think they sort of had to accept the fact that we were in fact not immortal, though they still clung to the essential Christian universalist notion that Christ will save every last soul, but perhaps the immortal part was the physical salvation bit was not quite correct.
Did the body of your father, the corpse of your father, was it laid to rest in the ground? Is that what happened?
Was.
Yeah, so there was no cremation, there was nothing like that, and you have to...
No.
Yeah, you have to kind of point the body in such a way so that it faces east or something. I'm really serious about the coming of how Christ will come back and, I don't know, so he can lift you up easier.
I don't know that he was necessarily buried facing the east per se, but I know that is a particular Christian doctrine that is naturally rooted in sun worship. You know, facing the east, facing the rising sun.
What a strange...
I've never heard of that.
That's a strange idea.
Where'd you hear about it?
I don't know. I think it was when I first heard about it at my father-in-law's funeral. And how they face it in the right direction, because when God comes, you know, when the whatever.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, it's easier to get you up out of the crypt, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah. That is just one among many, many characteristics of Judeo-Christianity that is pagan in origin.
Okay, yeah.
Wild.
They're borrowing, from older stuff. I mean, yeah, it's almost all borrowed. Probably.
Yeah.
So, Derrick, in your upbringing, were you devout? I mean, did you guys go to church every Sunday, or did you pray personally as a kid? Did you feel intense with your faith, or were you casual?
Well, first of all, we did not attend church because we felt that we were outcasts. We thought that we were unique and special, and that we, as a family unit, we were somehow the chosen ones. I mean, it's outrageous. We thought that the rest of Christendom did not have it right, and only we did, and so we did not attend church.
Was your mother the spearhead of that?
No, my grandparents were the spearhead of it, but my mother believed it. She fully embraced it, as did her sisters. And my mother was a very devout Christian. She knew her Bible up and down. She read an illustrated children's Bible to me as a kid, which those are memories that I'll cherish for the rest of my life.
So did your mom or you live near her sisters? Was it kind of a tight-knit geographical setting for your families?
Yeah, we all here in Evansville, Indiana, pretty tight-knit. You could almost call it a family cult.
Yeah, it sounds
so
like
to speak.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Did you fraternize outside the family, or did everybody kind of stay insular?
Again, it was only among my mother and her side of the family. So my mom, her sisters, and my grandparents. As kids, I would tug on my dad's shirt, "Dad, why don't you accept this?" All he could ever say was that he just wasn't sure. And then, of course, like I said, he, on his deathbed, finally embraced it, and he died, nevertheless. So his death was not only a catalyst for me in terms of being, suddenly uncertain about my entire worldview, but it was also a major loss. As I said in my book, Addictus, it left a swelling hole in my heart. My mom eventually remarried to a man who was not all bad, but in some ways was mentally and emotionally abusive. And so not only was this sort of the catalyst for my loss of faith and my new intellectual search, therein, but also for my alcoholism. Very early on in adolescence, I had to deal with this crushing loss of a parent, as well as this being subjected to the abuses of my stepfather. This sequence of events that took place in early adolescence paved the way for both my searching for truth, my studying of religion and philosophy and all that, as well as my alcoholism.
So the death of a parent is tragic, and it's hard and it's difficult, but this is compounded by his death literally represents the negation of this doctrine.
Yes.
And so it's a double blow. It's because there's a blow to your faith, but there's an existential blow to just, I lost my dad. How old were you?
Young.
12 years old.
12, yeah.
Yeah. Well, my father died of cancer when I was 17, and it is devastating. The rest of your life, you're still... I still wish I could talk to him. I still don't know that I have fully grieved.
Yeah, having studied religion as I have and having, made all of these discoveries and whatnot, I mean, I didn't come up the ranks formally. At Ball State, I studied communications. And it was when I was around 26, 27 years old that I really started digging deeply into religious studies, trying to get the just this unquenchable thirst for truth, this voracious curiosity. And I'd love to be able to pick my dad's, brain about the things I've discovered and what I've since come to believe or disbelieve. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you, just to kind of fast forward, by my late 20s, here I am really, digging into religion and philosophy, and at the same time, my use of alcohol is escalating. I had a friend purchase a bottle of flavored vodka for me one Christmas. Prior to that, I always drank socially. I never drank to myself. But once I received this gift and started having a few drinks in the evening, it was like, oh, this is fantastic. This is wonderful. I can have a few drinks before bedtime, and it helps me wind down and get to sleep easier. But as time went on, 1 or 2 drinks in the evening became 3 or 4. 3 or 4 became 4 or 5. And by at least the age of, around 27 or 28, I was a full-blown alcoholic. Just going on a straight drinking binge for the entire weekend, and then being unable to stop come Monday when it was time to go back to work, and eventually drinking just days on end. To where by the age of 29, I finally went to rehab for the first time for alcoholism.
Well, and there were several episodes where you went to rehab, got out, went back. There's just a lot of going on there. And you were working at a bank at the time. I think, were you in Nashville then?
I was in Nashville, Tennessee, yes. And the closest place that my insurance would cover as far as rehabilitation goes was in Huntsville, Alabama. So I spent about 3.5 weeks there. And then, as is told in my book, my family, my mom, my older brother, my sister-in-law, and their little one were on their way down to Huntsville from Evansville to pick me up and bring me back to Nashville after I completed the program. And on their way down to Huntsville, they were involved in an accident. And long story short, my mother was killed.
Jeez.
There's speculation that she may have removed her seatbelt in order to protect my niece. We can't know that for certain, but it does sound like the kind of thing she would have done. And so the timing was impeccable. Here it was, I was in rehab for the very first time for alcoholism. And my last night there, I lose the person to whom I was closest in this world. I was very much a mama's boy, very much attached to my mother. I loved her dearly, and she was a wonderful, amazing person. They were talking about a woman who adopted 2 children from China because that's how much her heart just bled for people. And so I lose my mom, you know what I mean, at one of the worst possible times I could have ever lost her. Not that there ever would have been a good time. But at the worst possible time. So needless to say, alcoholism and I would not be through.
I imagine the directors of the thing there looked at each other and said, this is going to be...
This won't stick. Yeah. Did you go right back to drinking then?
I managed to stay sober for roughly a month while I was at home for the funeral, but then I eventually returned to Nashville to go back to work and just kind of move on with my life. And it seems like no sooner than I returned to Nashville, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. I was no longer surrounded by loving and supportive friends and family.
Yeah.
It was back to reality. And I remember one night going out with some friends to dinner and a movie, and I just didn't have it in me to be social or convivial or have fun or laugh or anything like that.
Yeah.
So after dinner, I parted ways with them. They went on to the movie. I went ahead and decided to go home, and quite naturally, I stopped by a liquor store and picked up a bottle on the way home, and it was off to the races again.
Was it rare, or was it not uncommon for you to drink like an entire 750 liter or whatever they come in one night, or how much?
I would say at my high point, I was knocking down about a fifth of whiskey a day.
My God.
A day. And whenever I would run out of whiskey, or whenever I would try to like go back to work, and you know, where you couldn't drink and I had to remain sober, I would suffer excruciating withdrawals, sick to my stomach, sweating, and it felt literally like someone was firing an electric current of anxiety through my arms and my chest, my hands shaking. It was just the most awful feeling I've ever had in the world, ever.
Wow. And that's just like after 24 hours without a drink?
Frankly, the withdrawal seemed to hit me, drinking throughout the night and then having to get up in the morning and go to work. I was already, no sooner than I was not intoxicated, I was beginning to feel the effects of withdrawal.
Wow.
My gosh.
I was that addicted.
Yeah. So do you think that's what pushed you toward suicide?
Basically, I suffered from alcoholism from about my late 20s on through to my mid-30s. As this progressed, my circumstances just got worse and worse and worse and worse.
Lost your job.
To where eventually, eventually I had no job, no car, no income, was completely broke and homeless. And finally there just came the point where I was staying in a hotel because I had nowhere else to go. And realized that no sooner than I ran out of, the funds it would take to stay in this hotel, I would be homeless. And I felt as though I was doomed to repeat this pattern again and again and again of sobering up, falling back into the throes of alcoholism, and by, and ad infinitum.
Yeah, sure.
And I couldn't go on like this anymore. I attempted to take my life in one of the most dramatic ways you can possibly imagine.
How?
I literally took a knife to my own throat.
Oh, boy.
Was it a box knife?
It was a utility knife.
Yeah.
And I thought the death would be instantaneous. And, because Hollywood led me to believe, you see someone get their throat slit in a movie and they just bleed out and die right away. Well, that was not the reality. I was in shock after I had done what I had done, and I simply laid on the bed in the hotel room just waiting to bleed out and die. I literally laid in a pool of my own blood just waiting to die.
How long did you wait before you called 911?
I mean, at least a good hour.
Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Yeah, and eventually that survival mechanism kicked in to where I and some of it almost was impatience. It's like, seriously.
Come on.
I was getting impatient. It's like, I'm not dying. What the hell?
Jeez.
So I eventually did call 911, and looking back on it though, when I see the insanity and the absurdity of it, it's
I don't think it was that insane or absurd, because you were in a vicious cycle, and honestly, just reading it, I was getting tired. I read you go in and out, and then you'd have to go back, and you'd get out and stay clean for a month, and you'd go back, and I'm telling you, man, that's hopeless. There's a giant sense of hopelessness to that.
That is very descriptive of the experience of most alcoholics and addicts.
Yeah.
Perhaps not quite as dramatic a fashion of attempting to take one's life, But practically any alcoholic or addict you talk to, that's the nature of the beast.
Well, and I think that's what makes it easy for step one to be, I admit that I'm powerless.
Yeah. That's the thing, is I have no problem whatsoever admitting that I am powerless over alcohol. Mm-hmm. I am willing to admit that. Unfortunately, Alcoholics Anonymous, they want to extend that well above and beyond just alcoholism. They want you to believe that you are powerless in practically every respect of your life, because that's key to any religious cult, right? You have to be powerless in order to submit to the cult.
Yeah,
right, and that's the real point of this of your book too. It's we've got to hear the story that you told us to understand this, but here you are, a non-believer, and you're an alcoholic. And you go to the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is all about God and Jesus and things, and accepting the fact that you're powerless, as you said. My God, another barrier, another speed bump that you got to deal with. Wow.
I can't imagine how much easier things might have been if there were a secular approach to addressing this, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
From the get-go. How much easier might it have been for me? How much easier might it be for other suffering alcoholics and addicts who just cannot buy into the theological aspects of AA?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say that AA is all bad. There are invaluable lessons to be learned there, invaluable principles, and it works for a lot of people. But it does not work for everyone, and I'm a prime example of that. It only made matters worse for me, in fact. Yeah. And especially the sort of Pauline theology that is attached to it, that you are a
reprobate,
fundamentally mired in sin POS that is helpless short of a miracle, short of God's grace. It's a self-defeating, anti-humanist message that I find completely counterproductive and self-defeating. Yeah. And so I had to more or less find my own way out of the darkness. Yeah. And that wasn't easy.
Part of that would be, okay, you acknowledge that you're powerless over alcohol, but in every other aspect of your life, I'm not powerless. I actually can write my own script. I can make decisions. Right. I'm a big boy. Exactly. I need to take responsibility for the shape that my life has taken and make wise choices. I'm not powerless.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
And that is exactly what I say in the book. I am not powerless, and neither are you. If you're suffering from this, you may be powerless over that substance, but you are not therefore powerless.
Right.
You do have the inner strength, the inner resources to be able to defeat this without reliance on any kind of supernatural, magical nonsense.
Well, Derrick, take us through, like, the process. Like, when you went in there, what you heard, what happens? I've never been in one of those. I mean, I've seen stuff on TV, but how do they kind of inject Jesus and religion and stuff into it? Oh, they call it the higher power? They don't call it?
Well, Well, they don't mention Jesus per se. They actually sort of half-assed attempt to make it all things to all people, though they don't quite successfully do that. But the inherent idea is that God is mentioned all throughout, the 12 steps and all throughout the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's even a chapter devoted to the agnostic called We Agnostics, in which essentially Bill Wilson, who founded AA, attempts to make some philosophical arguments for the existence of God that sound like they come right out of a creationist handbook. And if you're like me and you've studied philosophy, you're able to see the fallaciousness of the arguments quite clearly. Yeah. There's not really an attempt at being all things to all people. They want you to believe in some sort of God, some sort of higher power. So, you go to an AA meeting, it begins with all of these invocations of God and certain, prayers that are just theistic in general without necessarily being specifically Christian. Nevertheless, the God that is invoked in AA, though they tell you you're allowed to create your own conception of God or your own conception of a higher power, it still very much emphasizes a God that is derivative of the biblical God. And, it's a personal God who loves you and cares for you and is able to help you in your plight.
Sure, he's your pal.
So it has all the trappings of the biblical God.
Yeah.
And if you're like me and you don't believe this stuff, it's really hard to stomach, because the message that's put out there is that if you don't accept this God's help, you will not be able to overcome your addictions.
Yeah, they even said you were arrogant.
Absolutely, yeah. Because as in any cult, if you've seen the movie Fight Club, for instance,
Yeah, great movie.
Brad Pitt makes a point of saying you are not a unique and special snowflake.
Yeah.
That is the message inherent in any cult, and especially in Alcoholics Anonymous. You are not allowed to think that you are special or different. Everyone is supposed to conform, is supposed to assimilate.
Right.
You're not special. You're not unique. You're all the same. It's right out of the religious cult's playbook. And so if you didn't fall in line and get with the message and buy into the 12 steps and pray, here they tried to be, again, there was a half-ass attempt, I would say, at being all things to all people, or perhaps attempting to be somewhat secular.
Yeah.
But you were nevertheless implored to pray.
Yeah.
Wow.
And to find God.
And then they call you arrogant if you actually, I think they're arrogant, I think
absolutely.
They know everything.
It's like Bill Maher. Yeah, Bill Maher says religion is arrogance masquerading as humility, and it couldn't be more on point.
Yeah.
All right, so you go through these meetings, and I think you found a way to tweak it and make it work, and it took several attempts, but you acknowledge you got some, just like what we do when people smorgasbord religions. They go in and they say, you know what, that whole bit about love your neighbor as yourself, I'll take that. That whole bit about everybody should hate your mother and father in order to follow me. I think I'm going to leave that one there.
Yeah. Stoning? I don't think I'm going to stone anybody.
And it sounds like you did the same thing with all these programs you went to. Like they were giving you some tools, and you took some of them and you left some of them behind.
Yeah, take the best and leave the rest. One thing that I pride myself on is my honesty and integrity. I'm honest to the core. The whole idea of being honest with yourself and others, that I kept near and dear to my heart. The serenity prayer, if you can just secularize it, you know what I mean?
Totally.
The serenity prayer says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. If you just remove the theological part of that and just, say to yourself, I'm going to accept the things I cannot change. I'm going to have the courage to change those things that I can, and I'm going to try and embrace the wisdom to know the difference. That's a beautiful message.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It doesn't need the theological trappings. So things like that I've kept near and dear to my heart, and the rest of it I've just left aside. And, interestingly enough, AA wants you to minimize your resentments, because resentments are poison, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
So one of the ways in which I minimize resentment is by not going to AA.
Yeah, that'd piss you off. That's funny.
Yeah. I take that so seriously that I don't go. Exactly.
Well, here's the thing that I think we've had, I think it was Valerie Tarico came on, and she was talking about how Christianity co-ops an idea, brands it as their own, and kind of then begins to think they have the monopoly on it or something. And I think one of the things that struck me in your book, and it resonated with me because as an ex-Christian myself, I've kind of wondered how to navigate this or negotiate with this, and that is the concept of forgiveness. And you address it in your book, and I want you to help me or understand how we unpack this in a secular way and how it can help us in emotional, personal health.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about the place that I finally ended up going over 3 years ago in Indianapolis. It was called Harbor Lights, and they were affiliated with the Salvation Army. and they were a church, essentially. It was both a church and a rehabilitation center. Interestingly enough, they did have what's referred to as institutional AA, and that they held AA meetings there, and they discussed Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 steps and whatnot. But it was nowhere near as enforced or ingrained as it had been at other places that I'd been to. Mm-hmm. And more than anything, what a lot of these counselors were emphasizing was the whole notion of forgiveness toward yourself. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if, the notion of forgiveness that you find within Christianity, that very much came to play there, and it was good for me. It was actually just what I needed. Mm-hmm. So just as with AA, the same can be said for Christianity, that there are good principles within Christianity, within practically every religion, mm-hmm. that you can take with you and keep near and dear to your heart and embrace without having to swallow all the Kool-Aid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the supernatural. Mm-hmm.
Because I needed to learn to love myself and forgive myself in order to be able to move on.
Yeah. I really latched on to a guy named David Rico, and he wrote a book about healthy adulthood or whatever. And I'm 51, and I've discovered some real arrested developments in my maturation that were kind of stunted by Christianity and my father's death at 17, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So I literally do these recitations on a regular basis, almost daily. And they're the 32 Declarations of Healthy Adulthood by David Rico. And one of them that makes me think of the way you were just talking about self-forgiveness is I grant myself a margin of error in my work and relationships. Mm-hmm. I release myself from the pain of having to be right or competent all the time. I live by personal standards, and at the same time, in self-forgiveness, I make allowances for my occasional lapses. I mean, and this sounds like common sense.
Yeah, sounds like being human.
But it's not. Yeah. It's not for everybody. Like a lot of people are very self-shaming, self-sabotaging, self-hating.
Yeah.
Yeah. And AA teaches that, even if they do so unwittingly. It is so mired in Paulinist theology.
What did you say? Pauline, yeah.
Yeah, Pauline theology. And this stuff, of course, is rooted in earlier Greek philosophical traditions like Orphism and Gnosticism, in which the flesh or the body was viewed as just inherently perishable and flawed and inferior to the spiritual world.
Yeah.
So this is stuff that AA inherited from Christianity, which Paul inherited from earlier Greek, Zoroastrian, and Gnostic traditions. And so when you're able to recognize it for what it is, that it's not any kind of revelation that either Bill Wilson or Paul of Tarsus had, that this is just the makings of mankind's imagination.
Yeah.
And so you're able to say, I don't need that. It doesn't come from any divine source. It's completely human in origin, and I think it's wrong, and I'm not going to allow myself to be impacted by it, because I find it self-defeating and not helpful.
Yeah.
It makes sense if it is healthy to forgive others, so that, we're not, as that saying about anger goes, holding on to anger is like holding on to a heated rock and just burning your own hand.
Yeah.
You've got to forgive others in order to have more peace in your life.
Yeah.
Sure.
Why wouldn't you do the same for yourself?
Yes, exactly.
Aren't you just as deserving of forgiveness as everyone else is in your life?
Sure.
It only makes sense.
Yeah.
To have a more tranquil, more serene life. By forgiving yourself as well as you would others.
Now, Derrick, when you're in this the 12-step, don't they have like a pal or a sponsor? Yeah, who's always like calling you up and giving you coins or something.
You're supposed to have a sponsor, and you are actually obligated to call them.
Okay.
Although depending on the sponsor, they may well, be someone who calls you and rides your ass as well. I only have positive things to say about the person who sponsored me. He was actually a wonderful guy, and he embraced a lot of just worldly wisdom from various traditions, including Buddhism. And he was really a great guy. I don't have anything bad to say about him. It's just that, unfortunately, he was so devoted to Alcoholics Anonymous that for the most part, that was all he had to offer me. You know, all he could say was, Derrick, I don't have anything new for you other than to, you know, implore you to follow the 12 steps and go to meetings. And that's just not what works for me. So he wasn't a bad guy. He was a wonderful person. I took much from him and learned much from him as I did from AA. But for the same reasons that I had to cut AA out of my life, I had to pretty much release myself from the bondage of sponsorship as well.
Yeah.
I think one of the ways that self-forgiveness and I think it was been important in my life, is that we call it this thing to where you have a problem, and then you have a problem with having a problem. So you have a problem and you're ashamed of your problem, or you're angry at yourself, or you're feeling that weakness, that self, you know, I'm powerless or whatever. And then we come up with these things like Paul did, and he borrowed it from Greek, you know, stuff where there is a war raging in my own body. Part of me wants to do the right thing, and yet my body or another part of me wants to do the wrong thing. And so we become a disassociated personality. And as opposed to being whole and unified and integrated. And part of that is you got to stop hating yourself, or you got to stop having a problem with having a problem. Yeah, you got a problem. And it's not okay that you have a problem. You're not giving yourself license to do it, but you are cutting yourself some slack to say, I'm human and this is real. And there's nothing evil or wrong per se about the fact that I am struggling with this. It just doesn't achieve a goddamn thing to just revel in self-hatred and self-shaming.
Absolutely. Amen.
Preach on.
Preach it.
Preach it. Yeah.
All right.
Amen.
Well, let me get into some personal questions. It's so funny because Bob and I, we get to this part of the show and we say, "Hey, what's your favorite libations?" But we won't.
Yeah, we
won't
can't ask
do
you
that.
that. Yeah, Coke, Diet Coke now. Right, exactly. But,
Diet Mountain Dew, actually.
Oh yeah,
Really?
Oh,
Diet
you got to
Mountain
have a little jolt. I understand that.
I saw a headline yesterday where a guy was 106 years old. I think he was American. And he drank a Diet Coke every day of the last 40 years. And he made it as accredited it for like why he was so healthy or whatever.
Oh gosh!
Wow. Wow.
And
Okay.
I bet Coke paid him a lot of money to say
Yeah,
that.
that's
so.
right. Yeah.
So
That's another something else that I'm going to keep near and dear to my heart. I'm going to keep drinking the Diet Mountain Dew and just rationalize that that's doing the best for me.
That's right. That's
so
right.
Derrick, are you married?
No, I am single. I'm 40 years old, still single, never married, no kids. Would love to meet the love of my life one day. I'm sure she's out there somewhere, but have yet to do so.
Are you on Tinder?
I am. And
Yeah.
it's a waste of time. It's an absolute waste
So
of time.
have you gone out for coffee with a semi stranger?
Yeah, I have actually. I have done that. I don't know if I'm old-fashioned or what, but it just seems as though the best way to meet people these days is the way we always have. I've not really had a whole lot of luck with dating sites or anything like that.
Well, what do you mean when, I mean, a lot of times you just go to a bar. You can't do that. I mean, maybe you could. You can get a glass of water, I suppose, or a Diet Coke or something.
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult for me because I'm kind of stuck in limbo in that the bar scene is no place for me to be, at least not on my own. If I'm with friends, you know, because I'm very open about my condition, you know, so you can't know me and not know, you know what I mean, about my past and about my condition. So as long as I'm with friends or other people who know me, I can be in a bar setting, be around others who are drinking and be fine. I would never go alone because that's just too risky.
Too
but as long as I'm with others, I'm okay.
Yeah,
but,
but you know, it's really a numbers game. You know, you've got to get out there and meet people, and that's the hard part. And the number, what is it? What they say? The number one marker of finding the right person is proximity. So you're going to meet somebody where you are. That will be the love of your life, unless you're in France, and then you meet somebody there who's the love of your life. So, yeah.
Right. And it's somewhat difficult to do when you live in a relatively small town. I mean, Evansville, probably about 300,000 people in and around the city. So it's kind of a mid-sized town, so to speak. But it's in southern Indiana, and it's just not the most progressive place in the world. So I have a hard time meeting, other people who are kind of on the same page as I am.
God, yeah.
So do you have a horror story that you can share with us? From one of those
horror stories?
Yeah, I've heard some horror stories today.
Well, from one of those one of those engagements.
From the engagement, I see. Oh,
I really can't without implicating someone. I just can't.
Yeah.
But I certainly could, and it just would be. I'd probably be sued.
Sure,
but so I really shouldn't.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, it's kind of when you even walk into the restaurant and you see the person sitting there for the coffee, you kind of, right then. I don't think so.
Sometimes, yeah.
I do. I did, because I did the dating thing back when I was doing it, there was just a telephone dating. It wasn't even computers. Yeah. So, But I did meet my wife, and she's wonderful. So.
Well, do you watch any like Netflix series or Hulu?
What I watch more than anything is a lot of YouTube, and I watch a lot of podcasts, interviews with various scholars, and documentaries.
Yeah.
I try to learn new things every day. So that's, something we haven't really discussed much, is that in all of this, I'm something of a scholar of religion, of, particularly ancient religion, biblical criticism, and whatnot. Granted, I only have a Bachelor of Arts in Communications from Ball State. I devoted about well over a decade, about a dozen years, in fact, to independent study of religion and philosophy.
Cool.
So I know a ridiculously insane amount of material in that regard.
Oh, that's cool.
So are you a mythicist?
Yeah.
I am, in fact, a mythicist. I am. It took me quite some time to fully understand and embrace the concept. But once I finally did, it's like, wow, these guys they've got a good point.
Yeah.
I think Richard Carrier said it best, actually. If you were to place yourself back in time, if you were to say 50 or 100 years before Christianity developed, and if you were to look at all of the historical trends, at all of the philosophical and religious types of thoughts, ideas, beliefs, legends, myths, and so forth that were popular at the time, you could have easily predicted that something like Christianity would develop, and that something like the Christ figure would come into being. It's just as God does not have any explanatory utility anymore when it comes to either the existence of life or the universe, neither does Jesus when it comes to the existence of Christianity. He doesn't have any explanatory utility whatsoever. Whether a historical Jesus existed or not, we would still have Christianity, and we would still have a Christ figure. You can look at the writings of, say, Philo of Alexandria from around the 20s of the Common Era, who's already talking about a firstborn son of God who is able to procure forgiveness of sins, who is God's agent of creation, the very image of God. I mean, in his sort of quasi-philosophical religious ponderings, you already have a sort of Christ figure that was developed purely from imagination. Paul's Christ Jesus simply seems to be something along those lines, an analog to what Philo of Alexandria was already talking about.
And yet, the current scholarship, the mainstream scholarship, is still belief in a historic Jesus. And the mythicists are the ones that are still on the outside. Yet you're right.
Yeah, we're the crazy ones. It's. I mean, and I even wrote a blog about this recently, about the kind of reactions that you get from mainstream scholars, which are nothing short of vitriolic and insulting. The very notion of mythicism just drives them up the wall, and it's easy to see why. When you know,
Why?
even if you are, if you're religious, then mythicism is naturally going to bother you. You cannot possibly swallow this idea that Jesus may have been nothing but mythical. But even among secular mainstream biblical historians like Bart Ehrman,
I was going to say Ehrman's not a mythicist.
Yeah, no, he's very much
right. Ehrman is a brilliant New Testament scholar, a brilliant textual critic. But when it comes to this particular field, he's out of his league. He literally does not know what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. I actually wrote a blog that debunks him completely on the notion of there having been dying and rising gods in the ancient world. Mm-hmm. He has emphatically stated that there were no dying and rising gods, that Osiris was not a dying and rising god. I wrote a blog titled Ehrman Errs, Yes, Bart, There Were Dying and Rising Gods, where I use primary sources and legitimate scholars of religion to completely debunk everything that he had to say in that regard.
Yeah.
So
those ideas were floating around in the first century or whatever, and before.
Absolutely.
And and
had been for a long time.
Yeah, and eventually all these notions sort of become syncretic. They all get squished together into one idea. And it happens to be, right now, it happens to be the Jesus idea, but it's, yeah.
All right. Well, the reason I, we're just going to wrap up with these personal questions. And sometimes Bob and I are kind of like TV junkies, and but you know what? You remind me of my 20-year-old son is the same. He's a YouTube junkie. He's a documentary, constantly learning, and, so I guess my obsession when I was first deconverting was with Hitchens. Are you a Hitchens fan?
I love Christopher Hitchens.
Me too.
If God could actually come back and just bring him back from the dead, I'd be happy.
I'd become a theist.
Yeah, he was great. He was
such a genius.
Yeah.
How about, we can't ask you about your libation, but how about, what kind of music do you listen to?
I'm a sucker for most any kind of music, but especially for film scores.
Okay.
I love anything that Hans Zimmer does. I think Hans Zimmer is a musical genius. I mean, anything he's ever touched, whether it be the Dark Knight series, Pirates of the Caribbean, Inception, Interstellar.
Sure.
I love his stuff. Film scores just move me. They if I can be said to have a soul, though not a literal one, music is what stirs my soul, and particularly film scores, for whatever reason, do that.
What app do you use? What music app?
YouTube.
Yeah.
So are you YouTube Red?
I don't know. Maybe because I'm older, I'm not with the times. I don't have anything set up as far as like with Pandora or any of these things.
Yeah.
I just like to get on my little iPhone, pull up YouTube music, plug in my earphones, and listen away.
Yeah, but the way my Droid phone works is that if I shut off my screen with YouTube playing, it stops the music.
Really?
Exactly, which is why I need to get with the times and download Pandora or something.
Well, here's the thing, is that you can pay for a thing called YouTube Red, I think.
Yeah.
And you can pay a subscription just like you would for Pandora and keep your YouTube, and yet when you push the button to turn off the screen, it keeps playing.
Oh. Well,
I'm definitely going to look into that then, yeah.
Yeah, because you put it in your pocket and the screen's open, and you could actually call somebody accidentally with your tit.
YouTube Red.
Maybe
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking lapel pocket.
Right
by your tit.
Yeah, I get it.
Okay.
I guess.
Well, Derrick, it's been a pleasure to meet you, and I guess if you ever come back to Nashville, we can't get a beer, but we could get a coffee or something. But
Yeah.
I didn't realize you guys are in Nashville. I used to live in Nashville. I lived there for 6 years, and I was there just a few weeks ago. So I do go down there from time to time to see some of my friends down there. The next time I'm down there, I'll absolutely give you guys a holler.
That would be great. Consider us your friends as well.
Well,
we'd love to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's anybody listening to the show that would maybe want to talk mythicism with you, or maybe talk alcoholism with you, are you into that? And if so, what's a good way to reach you?
I'm absolutely open to discussing those things. I love to talk about them. You can find me on Facebook, of course. It's Derreck Bennett. And my first name, it's spelled Derreck. Bennett is Bennett. I do have 2 blogs out there, Atheologica as well as Atheomedy, which is more of a comedic take on all of this stuff. In addition to that, of course, my book is out there, Addictus, A Non-Believer's Path to Recovery, which you can find on Amazon. If you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free up until the 17th of this month, that is. Otherwise, it's still pretty cheap. You can get it for $2.99 on Kindle or for $6.99 paperback.
You have an email address you could give out?
My email address, it's simply my first and last name at hotmail.com. So Derreck Bennett at hotmail.com. You're always free to send me an email message. But I'm definitely a social media junkie. I'm on Facebook all the time. Mm-hmm. So I'd welcome anyone to friend me and pick my brain. And if they want to talk about addiction, if they want to talk about religion, I would be more than happy to discuss that stuff.
Sure. What's your Twitter handle?
You know, I don't do much on Twitter anymore. I used to have, I think, a godless bastard on Twitter, but I don't mess with that much anymore.
God, that's great, Derek.
All right. Well, appreciate you calling. I don't know. What are you going to do? Tonight's Saturday night. What are you going to do?
Good question. I may do some more writing. I'm looking for another job as we speak because I'm not happy with the one I'm at now.
What are you doing?
I'm the staffing specialist, and it's oh dear God! If anyone I work with happens to hear this radio, there it is. I'm getting the fuck out of there as soon as possible.
You know, my daughter works for a staffing company, and she likes it.
Yeah, you know, I actually like the work itself. The idea of helping people get jobs is just where I work. It's absolute madness. They don't have their shit together, and I'm dead set on finding something else.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we won't have to put this in. Just wondering.
Yeah.
Wish me luck.
Yeah. Good luck. Absolutely. Yeah. You got it.
Well, thanks a lot, man.
Great talking to you.
Yeah, this has been great. Would love to meet with you guys at some point in the future in Nashville.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All righty.
Bye-bye. So that's our talk with Derreck Bennett. His book is called Addictus, A Non-Believer's Path to Recovery. It's available at Amazon, and there's links to it in the show notes. Also, his blogs are kind of interestingly named Atheologica, Atheologica. That's atheological.wordpress.com, and then Atheomedy, Atheomedy, like comedy, I guess. Atheomedy.wordpress.com. All these links are in the show notes. A link to Derreck's blog, where he discusses Bart Ehrman's blanket denial of dying and rising gods in antiquity, is available on the show notes. And a couple of blogs about mythicism are there. I want to thank Derreck again for coming on the show, and Bob, my co-host, for being awesome. Have a good week, everybody. We'll talk to you next week. Love you. Bye-bye.